Hello and welcome. My name is Pragya Tiwari.
And I'm Raja Sen.
Welcome to Play It Again, a podcast about how we consume culture and how culture consumes us. For this episode, we sat down with Amitava Kumar. Amitava Kumar is the author of several works of nonfiction and four novels. The books of nonfiction include Husband of a Fanatic, A Foreigner Carrying in the Crook of His Arm a Tiny Bomb, and A Matter of Rats. His novel Immigrant Montana was on the best of the year lists at The New Yorker, The New York Times, and President Obama's list of favorite books of 2018. His next novel, A Time Outside This Time, was described by The New Yorker as a shimmering assault on the zeitgeist. Kumar's latest, My Beloved Life, was praised by James Wood as beautiful, truthful fiction. 3 volumes of his diaries and drawings were published by HarperCollins India. His work has appeared in Granta, in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Harper's, Brick, Guernica, and The Nation. Kumar's awards include a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Cullman Center Fellowship at the New York Public Library, and residencies from Yaddo, McDowell, and the Lannan Foundation. He's a professor of English at Vassar College. But outside of these stellar credentials, this episode is particularly special because the idea of this podcast was at least in part inspired by the aforementioned 3 volume diaries and drawings of Kumar's published by HarperCollins, the Blue Book, the Yellow Book, and the Green Book. I fell in love with how Kumar writes about the books he's reading, the essays he's reading, the films he's thinking about, and how he links them up in these journals with what's going on in the outside world and how he's looking at all of it. And it got me thinking about how we consume culture in our private lives and the chasm between how we think of books and movies and how they shape us and how they affect us and the manner in which we end up writing and reading about culture in mainstream media and felt like maybe this was a gap that we needed to address. And of course, I could think of no one better to take this idea to than my friend Raja Sen. And yeah, so that is what made this episode so special.
It was really lovely talking to Amitava. We've read each other's work for a long time, but never actually spoken. So it was good to meet him on the podcast. And it was extremely erudite, extremely unassuming. There was a great flow to the conversation, I felt. And one of the things that stood out in this conversation for me was the way he spoke about being affected by books as a young man, and how when he read Somerset Maugham, and he read books about the idea of how meditation allows you to evolve beyond things like temperature, and you don't feel cold because you've meditated to a certain state, and how he, as a young man studying in Delhi, used to be in the bus freezing, but somehow mentally telling himself he's not freezing because he has read enough about meditation to allow himself that space and that luxury of pretending it doesn't matter. And if you pretend it doesn't matter hard enough, maybe it doesn't. So I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think his. We were talking to him about books and movies that have impacted him, not just as a writer or a creative thinker, but the way in which he approaches life. And the answer was fascinating. There were so many fascinating answers. I think one of the answers that I'm still thinking about since we recorded the podcast with him, is his answer to. What film he would like to rewrite as a novel. I can't stop thinking about it. So I would recommend, dear listeners, that you wait at least until you hear his answer to that. But other than that, also, I um, love the podcast for how many amazing recommendations it has. It is so jam packed with fabulous recommendations. All I wanted to do while recording it was keep taking notes with my pen and paper, which I will do when we sit on the edit of the podcast. I intend to sit with pen and paper so I can write down all the fabulous recommendations.
Right, a journal about journals. But here we go, a great conversation with Amitava Kumar. Hi, Amitava. In
Hi.
this podcast, we are quite obsessed with this idea of a cultural DNA, about the little building blocks of art that have, in their own way, shaped us, misshaped us, all of that. So, um, what do you think formed the matrix of culture when you were growing up?
Basically, I didn't think there was a lot of culture. Uh, there was agriculture. Uh, थोड़ा सा चूतिया टाइप जोक है लेकिन anyway हाँ but when I thought it was a real revelation. मुझे फिल्मों when I used to go to watch a film, I was required as an escort for my sisters, and you had to go with them in the rickshaw. I was always afraid of watching films. And then it was a revelation when, for example, a film like Chitchor or something like that offered so much pleasure. But the real revelation was, I still remember in Patna uh, watching Manthan,
Ah.
and I felt, wow, ये सब चीजें भी, just suddenly to have something very meaningful delivered on the
Hmm.
screen. Not that I was a young commie myself or anything, magar
Hmm.
just to have something and to see that rage that Nasiruddin Shah conveyed and Smita Patil, people who were strangers to me, मुझे बड़ा, so that was a good, that was a turn, that discovery. And then later, just to give you one other example, for my plus two, I came to Delhi, and suddenly I was in a co-ed, and you wanted to impress the girls. और भाषा एक साथ एक मेरे लिए एक was a little strength of mine. So I started reading more carefully, at least the textbooks, to read George Orwell, Kushwant Singh, Dom Morris. You know, there was there was an essay where I think it was Dom Morris describing a drive through Rajasthan. I've been thinking about it in the last 2-3 days कि वो कैसे मिलेगा मुझे फिर से क्योंकि मैं राजस्थान जा रहा हूँ. Those little essays which seemed to describe, in Kushwant Singh's case or Ved Mehta's case, the streets around me in Delhi, gave a name to those buildings. That was another great part of that. That that sort of entered my bloodstream and opened a new world to me.
You said you were afraid of watching films until you watched films like Chitchor and Manthan. Why was that?
Why? When you heard the loudspeakers going through the streets of your town, whichever town you were in Patna, they would say always, मार धाड़ नाच गाने से भरपूर so
Yeah.
there was always the violence, and I was a coward. I was scared all the time of these things. That was one thing, but also suffering. Our films have a lot of tears in them, और मेरा दिल बहुत घबराता था इन चीजों से, so मुझे बड़ी डर लगती थी. I remember एक film, the first, I begged my uncle who died just this August. I was remembering this episode because I begged him here. He was a young man, he was, single. He took me to watch a film in which very early in the film, Sanjeev Kumar's family drowns in the river. There's a whirlpool and then they drown. I began to beg him to, "No, take me home, you know. So I was afraid of, I was afraid of those tears that, uh, would always assail one in Hindi films.
It's quite a coincidence that you're saying this because we recorded a podcast with Swanand Kirkire, as I was telling you before we started recording, and he said this exact same thing, that he was growing up in Indore and he was terrified of watching films because koi na koi mar jata tha. And
सही बात.
it was very hard for him to watch cinema. But ek baar in an interview, you had said that you did eventually fall in love with the movies and you made a
Yeah,
scrapbook. फिल्मों के
yeah.
शायद पोस्टर रहे होंगे or photographs of actors, actresses, and that scrapbook was thrown away. Um, and I really identified with that because when I was growing up in Calcutta, my father frowned upon my watching any kind of Hindi films. Um, and I was wondering what that throwing away of scrapbook meant for you. Did it kind of instill an idea of a guilty pleasure? Did it draw some kind of elusive boundary between high culture and low culture? How did you learn to navigate it?
Yeah. What what was happening at that time was that Illustrated Weekly, I think it might have been M.V. Kamat's time, I can't remember, or Kushwant Singh. Illustrated Weekly would print pictures. Ab Jitendra, for example, Jitendra would have very rosy cheeks in those photos, and so would Hrithik Roshan's dad. What is his name? Rajesh Roshan,
Rakesh
Rakesh Roshan.
Roshan.
हाँ.
Rakesh. Yeah.
And एक मुझे बड़ी clearly याद है, Pran की एक तस्वीर थी in which Pran was holding an apple in his hand and he had a knife and he was cutting it. And I also cut that out and I would stick that in my notebook.
Hmm.
And what actually happened was that it wasn't till some time later that I realized that the notebook had vanished. And not to make this a case of childhood trauma, but the thing about childhood is that you don't understand what has happened. So for me, it was a mystery. What happened? So there wasn't any lessons to be drawn as much as confusion. But at the back of it, because even without understanding, even a child understands psychological pressure. I did understand that there was a dismissal taking place here. At some level, I understood that this was low form or something that my parents did not want me to go toward. So I absorbed that lesson, yes. Also, because now I am a writer, I should mention that the same uncle that I was telling you about who had taken me to see the movie, he was my father's younger brother. I remember my father reprimanding him. You know, I'll first say what he was saying in Hindi. He said, "Khali upanyas padhne se zindagi chal kategi." You know, will you keep reading novels? Because my uncle would read these cheap novels, which I did not at that time know were cheap novels, but you know, those little jasusi novels, jasusi kitab padhna hai, kaha tha, you know, that's how you say it in Bihar. So I also thought that novel writing was a low form. You know, what you had to do was either read Bhagavad Gita or read the books that would get you into the civil services. Yeah, this was a lesson early imparted to me in Bihar.
But these jasusi books, did you ever read them? And were you, I'm curious about the point where, at which point you decided that novel writing is not a low form and that ये
Ah,
जासूसी की किताबें सब वैसी किताबें नहीं होती, कुछ किताबें impactful भी होती है. I remember as a child reading Fahrenheit 451
yes,
from
yes,
an
yes.
older brother and suddenly realizing it's a different world, different horrors, and what
Bilkul,
that kind of a book does to you after you've
bilkul,
only
bilkul.
read abridged classics. You have
Yes,
no
yes,
idea.
yes. Yes, I had borrowed a book from the British Council Library in Patna, which is now closed. Uh, it was Moon and Sixpence. Or was it Cakes and Ale? It was a Somerset Maugham novel, and I had borrowed it. And I remember standing, in a line for buying cinema tickets. Regal Cinema, ऐसे कुछ, Rupak Cinema in Patna near Gandhi Maidan for my sisters. And I was reading this book और मुझे समझ में आ रही थी ये किताब. And I thought, यार ये तो गजब है. You know, I have a distinct, I can still recall that afternoon where I felt, oh, ये तो, this is किताब मुझे समझ में आ रही. I never read the Jasusi books. And my appreciation for low culture came much later. But but it was the real thing that happened, boss, was I came to Delhi and these CBSE books. I somehow found something in these essays, particularly in the essay by George Orwell called Why I Write, which gave me a way into thinking
Hmm.
कि बेटा ये तो तुम भी कर सकते हो, you know. And there was, I should add, in case young people are listening to your podcast, there were these books called, there were these thin booklets called Words Are Important. A friend of mine had bought them, just in which you could enhance your vocabulary. तो वो भी मेरे लिए बड़ी सुविधामंद हुई. They were convenient for me and they were useful for me because then I could, say to women in my class in modern school that I was sanguine rather than saying I was confident. Yeah, so that was, तो vocabulary बढ़ाने से ही literature का एक sense आया.
You know, it's so this low culture, high culture thing is so. I've negotiated this boundary in so many different worlds in so many different ways. When I was growing up, my father, talking of childhood trauma, made me learn Ode to Solitude and Rhyme of Ancient Mariner.
क्या
And
बात है.
once he found me reading a novel, and not a jasusi novel, And he said to me that, I'm his only child. He said that, novels are for feeble minded women. And you either read plays or you read poetry. And when
क्या
you are
बात है?
old enough, you will read essays.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, he didn't, in his imagination, cinema didn't even feature. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that his daughter would grow up to be the biggest Hindi cinema buff and the biggest, and something that he still denies. But, Amitabh, I was wondering, you've said
Yeah.
so many times that you wanted to be a writer when, you had this idea of that you wanted to write when you were young, and something that came back to you over and over again. Um, what were like, if I had to ask you that through this whole journey of reading and figuring out what you like, what you don't like, what is good, what is bad, are there some books that have ended up being really, really foundational to you? If I had to rephrase this question, it would be a desert island discs kind of question. That if you could go with a few books to a desert island that you may or may not come back from, what books would you take?
You know, I was a bad student in college. I was, because of my father, I was enrolled in political science and I did not attend class. Sankarshan Thakur and I, we were students together. So during that time, because I was a bad student, I did not get a hostel. So I had to sleep on the floor of another a Bihari friend's room. वो उसके room में there was a book by Naipaul, Finding the Center. So that was foundational for me because opening its pages, I found an account of his own formation as a writer. It was as if something is being shown to you in slow motion. तो मुझे वो slow motion में किसी को writer बनते हुए मैंने देखा उसमें. And I thought, wow. So that is my one. And just to have a certain coherence in my answer, maybe I could stay for a moment longer again with Naipaul. A book like A House for Mr. Biswas, which is really a plumbing of failure and suffering. And, my son said the other day that he stopped. My son is a teenager. He said he stopped reading A House for Mr. Biswas because he did not want to read of the father who is a loser. And I thought, oh, wow, that's the tragedy of it. Except it is so funny, the book, And I think my son, having inherited my Bollywood genes, was only seeing the pathos of his own father as a loser, identifying too much, etc. Anyway, so, so that is another book on the desert island. Uh, I have to say that J.M. Kudzia ki kitab, Waiting for the Barbarians, is another book I would like to take because it's writing about apartheid South Africa, but it never mentions apartheid. You don't know where you are. And yet it is a story about power and decimation of, a genocidal decimation of others. तो उस तरह की किताबें हैं. Since we are all from South Asia, and we should certainly promote solidarity among South Asians, Michael Ondaatje's running in the family, not least because we are all family-minded people. Families are important to us. I have invoked my uncle in this talk. You have invoked your father. Uh, Running in the family is an exuberant account of madness in the family. Or hum sare, all of us come from families, I believe, where there are all kinds of eccentric characters. So there is a richness of social life in the subcontinent that none of these goras can ever match. So, वो ज़रूरी है किताब है, I want to suggest. I'm trying to think how Arundhati Roy's books have also meant a lot to me. There is that great line that I sometimes repeat when talking to people about, which I think Raj Kamal Jha might have offered me first, कि भाई हम लोग तो we are those Indians who English came to us as a language for doing homework. So how to escape that bind? When you read Arundhati Roy, you know she is not doing homework. वो तो सिर्फ अपने freedom का ऐलान कर रही है, you know. But more important, so that's what you see in the novel, which made her famous. But something that is a test for my own courage is how freely she not only speaks about politics, but how freely in language she talks about politics. You know, what her metaphors are. कि भैया, I'm not a writer activist because that sounds like sofa come bed, you know, something. तो उसके similes, metaphors भी है ना, बड़े lively होते हैं. So I want to I want to value them too. One last example I want to give is, you know, Annie Ernaux won her Nobel a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. In fact, let me give you two examples. Two women from the West. Svetlana Alexievich, the only journalist to have won the Nobel. उसकी किताब में जो purity of human voice जो मुझे मिलती है, you know, the purity of the human voice that is there in those books, I really appreciate, because all her interviews plumb a richness that is just unique. And Annie Ernaux's simplicity, you know, the directness, the bluntness of her approach, and yet so much art in a simple sentence. मुझे, so her books, I'm rereading The Years right now, but A Man's Place is a story that is the little account that she writes of after her father's death. मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लगता है.
Thank you for those recommendations, Amitava. I mean, they're obviously interesting to see what your perspective is and how it's been shaped by these books. But let's come to one of yours, you know, to Home Products, which I believe started out in a different shape, started out as a film script. And I'm wondering how that happens, like the film script becoming a novel. We know novelizations happen, but this is a, you know, two entirely different forms. I've struggled with one, try to, you know, muster up courage to try and struggle with the other at some point. But I am curious about how that shift happened. How do you think, and how you think of those formats separately?
Yeah, it didn't start as a film script. There was a film script that happened in the process during that time, and I then to put it in the novel, and I'll explain what happened. I was just telling you that I love A House for Mr. Biswas. So after my daughter had been born, I'm talking now of more than 2 decades ago, I I would read a few pages of A House for Mr. Biswas. She was a little child at that time. She was, you know, like 2 months or 3 months. I had to take a leave from my university. तो मैं एक बगल में Starbucks था मेरे ससुराल के बगल में. I would read 10 pages and then I would write the novel. Home Products. I had started writing it because I was inspired by something related to Indian cinema, which was I was finishing a book and then I watched Satya. And I thought, who is this guy? पता चला कि वो तो बिहार से है. मैं मनोज वाजपेयी की बात कर रहा हूँ. And then I found out, अरे, when I looked more, that he's from a village close to mine. So I thought, what would someone coming from those places need to learn? And more importantly, what would he need to unlearn in order to have that energy on the screen that I saw him having? ठीक है? तो मैं home product start किया लिखना. But then, so this is where the script part comes. I was doing a reading in Delhi, in Bombay, and Mahesh Bhatt came with Irfan in the audience. And Mahesh Bhatt said, आप भी हमारे लिए भी कुछ लिखिए. And I had just watched Makbul, so I wanted to do nothing but to write for Irfan. ठीक है? लेकिन फिर मैंने सोचा, मैं भट्ट साहब को कहा कि यार भाई साहब ऐसा है, यहाँ पर तो लव स्टोरीज बड़े चलते हैं, लेकिन we don't have any love stories about old people falling in love. So let me try that. And I wrote something. And they played around with the idea. It was basically an adaptation of Chekhov's Lady with her Dog, but in Amritsar. You know, I thought, देखते हैं, you know, a middle-aged adulterer and a young woman who is, and what happens? So I went with it. They were excited for a while, and then nothing happened. So मैंने उसको उसमें से कुछ डाल दिया. So what I'm saying is, I have never really attempted writing a script for a film. I've written a couple of documentary scripts. Anything, whether it is a novel, it's an essay, is always a leap into the unknown. You are a little bit helpless. You have something, you maybe sometimes have have what is it called, a life jacket that keeps you afloat for a few minutes. The point is to keep flailing your arms, keep kicking your feet so that you stay afloat a minute longer, and then and then help arrives. That's the story. Okay, Raja, that's my advice. So you
Right.
keep doing what you're thinking of doing. It will keep you for 2 or 3 minutes. You'll fear you're dying. You might take a gulp of water, but you will survive if you keep moving your arms every morning. 150 words.
I think the words are less the problem than the idea of where they'll actually lead. But
Yes, yes, yes.
but I've because you mentioned House for Biswas a couple of times, I'm going to just drop in a little House for Biswas, Mr. Biswas digression, which is my favorite thing about a favorite fact about that book is that once upon a time they tried to make a musical out of House for
Yes,
Mr. Biswas.
yes,
And
yes,
the person making the musical was the musician Monty Norman, who
yes,
had this theme and he didn't know what to do with it, and the musical never really ran. It was not successful. I don't even think it was staged, but the compositions were made. So many years later, when he was asked, not many, maybe 3 years later, when he was asked to do music for a
yes,
Jasusi book adaptation,
yes, yes.
he co-opted that theme, and that was the James Bond theme.
I know
So
that story.
yeah,
Isn't that a
all
great story? That's an amazing story. Naipaul's gift
yeah.
to low culture.
Naipaul's many gifts. Um, I'm wondering, because we were talking about novels to films and films to novels. We think we know of so many adaptations that have gone from novels being adapted into cinema. You think there are any movies that would make for a good novel?
You know, I was just saying that English came to us as a language of doing homework, which means that in our novels, or at least the novels that I started reading when I was, let's say, in my teens in India, there was a certain stiffness. And where I'm going with this is the thought, ki boss, the lightness that one sees in Basu Chatterjee's films, वो lightness जो है, if one tried to turn his films into English novels, that would be a great challenge, you know? For example, I can imagine, मैं कल ही रात को सोच रहा था ये बात. I was trying to, because I was writing about the 80s last night. I was thinking, how wonderful is that adaptation of Kali Yuga,
Hmm.
of Mahabharat for Kali
Yeah.
Yuga, the film by
Mm,
Shambhanagar.
right.
And I thought, this could have been a great novel, yeah? Because there, it is all serious, it's all very, very, very serious. But it would be, my first challenge would be to produce a light novel. Not not so extreme in its comedy as, a novel that I admire very much, English August, Upmani Chatterjee's, but something that has the lightness of an ordinary day in, let's say, February in a small town in India. And you can imagine Amol Palekar and Zarina. What's her name? Zarina Wahab naam tha na?
Wahab, huh?
Yeah. So that,
But also Anubhav. Anubhav would make Tanuja,
yes,
Sanjeev Kumar.
Sanjeev Kumar.
That would make for a very airy novel. ये सवाल मैंने तुमसे 2012 में भी पूछा था. Would you like to know तुमने क्या जवाब दिया था?
I would love to. Oh my God. I have no memory of it. Bataiye.
You had said Maqbool. You said, I know Maqbool is an adaptation of a play, but I would like to write Maqbool as a novel because it has its
Wow.
own richness.
Ekdam. Yaar, that film is a lesson for. I mean, I think that film should be taught to people at the Royal Shakespeare blah 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 theater in it is it is really an example of great creativity being brought to a classical creative text. I hope you guys agree. I hope you guys like Makbools.
Yeah,
Fida.
Maqbul's quite a
Love,
few. I mean, how do you
love.
not like Maqbul?
Yes. I mean, I don't find the other one. I mean, for example, people have celebrated the one Kashmir, for example.
Heather.
Heather. Yeah.
Heather. But Makbul for me is a gem. It's fucking perfect.
Mabul is a once in a lifetime.
So क्या तो मैंने वो हाँ, that's a great example. हाँ, I agree with that younger self. That's amazing. 2012, my God.
Though I would rather read your novel on Anubhav or another Basu Bhattacharya film,
Wow,
or
that's a
but
great. I take note of it right now. One
I think
summer.
fundamental problem जो है अनुभव का novel लिखने में
जी.
is that what do you do with मेरी जान मुझे जाना कहो मेरी जान? How do
Ah,
how do you make
oh,
that prose? And that is the big
you have
challenge.
pierced my heart. Oh,
But tell me something. When we look at, you're talking about where, you use this very evocative phrase about the lightness of a summer's day. And tell me, has any book or film affected not just your writing, but something fundamental about your character, about your personality, maybe about the way you live your life day to day?
yes, yes. Let me give you a very early example. When I was in higher secondary, when I was in +2, I happened to read Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge. मुझे पता नहीं why are Indians or colonials so affected by Somerset Maugham. There is a Pico Iyer essay about it, I think, somewhere. खैर, these were books that I found on my shelf. An American man, I think from Chicago, goes to India, and I think Raman, Maharshi Raman ke ashram mein or something like that. He starts meditating, and there is a set of pages that is devoted to the meditative practice of this guy. This affected me a lot. I too began meditating. I would look at a candle and try to meditate. And I thought, I convinced myself that I was becoming not only spiritually elevated, but there was a physical transformation taking place in me, and that the cold of the Delhi cold did not affect me. So I abandoned my sweater, and I would only wear my khadi kurta from Khadi Gramodyog on near Palika Bazaar. That's where I would buy it.
Janpat.
Yes, and I would just wear that kurta and jeans or whatever and go to college, and the wind would whip my neck in the DTC bus university special. But I was like, नहीं मैं तो meditate करता हूँ मुझे इस सब चीज़ों से कुछ है ही नहीं. I felt I had transcended some things. So that was the first thing. I want to now give you a recent example.
Hmm.
There's this amazing novel, I think, though he has been critiqued a lot also by some people I admire, Richard Powers' ki The Over Story, which is a novel about trees. And there's a part that involves an Indian guy character too, and the dialogue is very, very thoda sa sus. But just this awareness of nature has really changed my behavior. In fact, I even taught a course which I wouldn't have thought about it 10 years ago. I taught a course called Writing About the Anthropocene. My love for trees, I locate it in that novel. The novel has changed my outlook on the world uh, because of its grand design, its purpose, and its relevance.
No, it's funny that I can also name a book that I've read that has
बताइए
changed. The Blue Book.
क्या
It
बात है
filled me with immense regret for all the years that I have read, because one does read quite vociferously without a pen in hand. And I vowed never, ever to do that again. And I am happy to say I have now reread the Blue Book thrice. I have stuck to my word. And even the Blue Book is now so filled with notes that I'll have to buy a new copy.
I will
So
come and give you. I'll hand deliver a new copy to you. Don't buy it. हाँ.
please do that. Please do that. But, in general, I think as I grow older, I have started to do the reverse. I watch the films which will take me to a world where I want to live for a little bit. As a result, I'll watch a lot of films that are set in the 20s in Paris, or so that I can inhabit that world a little bit more. I can walk in that world a little bit longer. But, you know, Amitava, one of the things that I love so much about um, your works, because you write essays, you write cultural criticism, novels, poems, kya nahi likhte ho tum. But the one thread that, you know, runs through all your work is a celebration of other writers, other writings, other art, other people, their ideas, you know, and the way in which you quote them, you sometimes make them even more beautiful than they are, even though you are always almost picking near perfect writers, near perfect sentences. You know, in your placement, you do something magical with them. And I think one of the greatest delights I remember was finding Prithvi Theatre in Home Products. You know,
Yes.
a place that's very dear to my heart, a relationship that started in my early 20s and carries on. In fact, in 4 days, I'm leaving for the festival where I am every single year hosting talks on contemporary modern theatre.
Wow.
Um, and then, of course, you talked about Satya, you talked about spending time with Manoj. And because I happen to have read, I think, pretty much everything you've written, including your guide to good academic writing, which I don't know why I read. Uh, but so I can think of so many examples where, you know, you've quoted, you have quote tweeted, rather, in our parlance, other writers, other books. But for people who may not be as familiar as I am with your work, can you give us a few examples of how you have woven in your favorite scenes, lines, moments into your own works?
Yes. 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 For example, the first writing group I joined, this was in my 20s, was in Minneapolis, and I was trying to write, and I had just written the opening scene of what would become Immigrant Montana 20 years later. And this writing group had this young woman who was 22, 23, I can't remember. And her name is Cheryl Strayed, and she wrote a book called Wild uh, that Oprah chose for her club, and then Reese Witherspoon made a film of it. Now, I always felt, because I myself, when I was her age, which was a few years earlier, lacked ambition or lacked direction. I thought this was a wonderful quality that this young person had. So she, all the letters she sent me, I saved them. And so when I was writing Immigrant Montana, for example, there was one card she had sent in which she mocked me, I think. I think she was mocking me. She was having a nice joke. And the card showed a young man, a man from the back, sitting in a cafe next to a coffee cup. And the line under it said something like, the waitress came and gave him the coffee, but did not flirt with him. And this depressed him, or something like that. ठीक है? तो ये तो मुझे बड़ा it was a little story there. So I put it in my novel, where my protagonist, the person who is dating, shows him this card and says, "Is this you?" No, so that is one scene. For example, I'm just trying to think. I have one of my closest friends is this Nigerian American writer called Teju Cole. I love the way he looks at things, and he told me, and then he wrote about it in a short essay in Granta, where he described a scene. He described a scene where you're in a crowded bus in Lagos, for example, and one man will suddenly shout, "Thief! Thief! Stop thief! He has stolen my penis." And I thought this was, this was shocking, amazing. And I was trying to make sense at the same time about how so quickly in India, someone can be lynched by someone saying, कि भैया ये तो beef खाता है. In this case too, Teju had said that the person who is being accused can very quickly be caught by the mob. A tire will be thrown around his neck and he can be set to fire. So in my novel, A Time Outside This Time, my narrator is talking to a doctor from Nigeria who describes this scene. So I just put it in. Um, it does, sometimes it doesn't have to be writing itself, the sentences, but in every novel of mine, I have a friend here जो देसी है, दून स्कूल से निकला था, उसके बाद यहाँ पर कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी में एक्टिव था, उसका नाम है विजय प्रसाद. तो हर नॉवल में I put a Vijay and I have some reference to it. For example, he has a book called Darker Nations. So in one book, my character is reading, has a reference to Darker Nations. In another book, a woman, the narrator's mother gets a gift of a Hemingway book by Vijay, who is the head of the Communist Party or something. In my latest novel, my protagonist, Jadu, is a professor on Fulbright at Berkeley. He has come from India. And eating his lunch at an Indian restaurant, he opens the Berkeley paper, we know the student paper, and there is an advertisement from one Vijay which says, 18 to 21 girls, if you want to eat Indian food, call Vijay. And there is a phone number. So I put my friend's phone number there. So I'm paying tribute to my friends, but also showing my love in
Vijay is
different.
your Subhash Ghai. He has a cameo.
See, there are obvious references and tributes, but often like this kind sort of a personal Easter egg, which is only there for you and for Vijay to know, and now, now the two of us and other listeners. But are there times when, as a writer, your work is actually carrying on a dialogue with other writers, and that is something far beyond what the reader is? It's not for the reader to gaze at. It's between you and that writer, or between you and that writer's work. So could you talk about a little bit of this, that you're working out your relationship with other words and other writers who have influenced you deeply?
Yes. I mean, the obvious example is, of course, Naipaul. I In late 90s, I went with a friend of mine who was also from Patna and is now a dean of film studies or something in University of Miami, a good Bengali fellow like you, Raja. Uh, we went to Trinidad and made a film called Pure Chutney because I was thinking of myself as doing the Naipaul in reverse. He had gone to India to find his ancestors, or to find the truth about that land from which his ancestors came. And instead of roots, as in ROOTS, I was interested in what happens when you adopt roots, ROUTES. And I
Yeah.
was going back from India to Trinidad to see how that movement to a different place, what kind of culture had taken, how a variety of cultural encounters had produced a sense of hybridity, newness, difference. So that has been a lifelong dialogue, in my opinion. I wish Naipaul was still alive. I only have one example where something I published in New Statesman because I had gone to the hotel where he had stayed in Srinagar and I wrote about it. I was surprised and pleased. I went to my office in Penn State and there was a fax waiting for me from him where he said, "Dear Amitava," and the leeward was a doghouse, really. Better for it to be turned into the bunker that you described. And then he went on. I I have I wish he was alive so that I could have a chance to show some of what I write, and maybe he would have seen how it is in dialogue with him, etc., etc. So that's one. Um, there are many others. I think I'm on a daily dialogue with my friend whom I have just mentioned, Teju. We talk about uh, the aesthetics of representation, how one presents oneself as an artist, what one should do with machines, the technology, how should we think, how should we teach. There's another writer who Indian readers should know more about is Jeff Dyer because he has written books about India. He's so funny,
Hmm.
and his he has this line that I quote many times where he says, Albert Camus said, that the only way to speak about what you love is to speak of it lightly. And there is no one better than Jeff Dyer at speaking lightly. What light, because every time any one of us wants to be meaningful, wants to be relevant, it is very easy for us to slip into seriousness. When you want to say to, let's say, Raja, when you want to say to a woman that you love her, I'm sure you're not going to make 5 jokes about it. Instead, you're going to attempt to look deeply into her eyes and say, I love you so much, etc., right? Um, this reaching for pathos is a great human failing. I think the desire or the ability to be light, that's a real challenge. So I think of Jeff Dyer's work as a real challenge to be light. Another name, I'll end this by saying, there's Penelope Fitzgerald, is a writer who came to novels very late in her life, but wrote these remarkable works, a couple of which I don't even understand entirely. But there is a book called The Beginning of Spring, I believe I'm quoting it right. You know, I looked at her archives in the British Library and I realized that she was taking much of the knowledge about all the action takes place in Moscow. She was learning it from a guidebook,
Hmm.
and yet it seems so authentic and at the same time so light. I've used this word now 20 times, 50 times here, but that is a real challenge. I want what that exuberance, that sense that there is oxygen, if not champagne, flowing through your sentences. You know, the taste of Bellini is being tossed down your throat with careless abandon. वो अगर language में आ जाए, that is a good challenge to have.
Vidava, are there writers or are there books or films that you have enjoyed, not by you, that do something similar, that are in conversation with other books, other writers, or other films? Can you think of some examples?
Yes, again, to mention Teju's work, for example, uh, because I've taught his breakout novel, Open City, a few times, I take great pleasure in pointing out to him how I can detect all the people he's in dialogue with at different points. For
Yes.
example, a passage owes everything to the ending of The Dead by James Joyce.
Hmm.
Uh, another thing that comes from J.M. Coetzee, another thing that comes from Penelope Fitzgerald, uh, vagara vagara. I wish I knew. I have invoked Michael Ondaatje, for example. I wish I knew what are all the references in English August. What are the historical things? Where did he get the references to those colonial um, adventures, um, which I don't have, but I'm sure. Yeah, yeah. हिंदी राइटिंग में भी वैसा काफी होता ही होगा. I would be so interested in having a discussion with someone who explains how a prominent Hindi novel is in dialogue, not just, and draws upon not just other Hindi writers, but on writers from the West also. You know, one can expect some easy example would be someone like Nirmal Verma or a Gay, um, but there must be others. Um, or if we come to films, isn't it true? I have read it somewhere that Satyajit Ray had watched The Bicycle Thieves like 16 times or something before he took the boat back to India, and on the boat he wrote Pather Panchali. So that is in dialogue. मैं तो सोचता हूँ कि if one has one book, if one has one book that one is in dialogue with, that's good. If one has 6, that's even perhaps better, because then you are less beholden to just one book and less likely to be accused of plagiarism. But that's a good way to do work.
No, lovely, lovely answer. And because you bring up Jeff Dyer, I would mention his book Zona, which I really quite love.
Right.
His book, his take on Tarkovsky's Solaris. Such a brilliant book because it kind of makes you watch the film again through different eyes,
Same, same.
and it's really quite. I think it's an experiment that more writers should do, because it is a love letter to the film, but it is a deconstruction and it is a recontextualization that is quite spectacular.
Exactly
Uh,
right. Yes, 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 yes.
Now, we've mentioned a lot of writers and a lot of work that has inspired you in various ways. Do you, as a writer, how do you deal with the anxiety of influence? Do you know your own voice and how all of these various things that are coloring in the voice,
Yeah.
how is it still yours, or how much of it is still yours?
It is true that it is a little bit of a turn off when I'm reading someone and immediately it reminds you of someone else, and you know that that's what they are drawing upon. You know what I'm saying? At the same time, I should tell you that when Home Products came out, Mrinalini Mukherjee, who was a prominent Indian critic at that time in Biblio, called my novel Napoleon, and I was like, "Yaar, ye to theek hai. This is great. I've achieved my goal." You know. But if someone said that right now, I would be just a little bit leery of that, you know, or I would think, hmm. Um, so I, I do want, I do. That's why I was saying that one should perhaps have 6 influences,
Hmm.
so that it is not about not being overwhelmed by just one, and carry. There is no way of doing utterly original writing, but it should be what one should work toward through a lifetime is a certain voice that is your own. So what I'm saying is I welcome influence, but the emphasis or the worry is about the anxiety part. In other words, that's where I put my load to think about कि यार अगर मैंने 6 तस्वीरें ली तो how is it clear कि भाई ये तस्वीर मैंने ही ली है? You know, I remember I was walking through some part of Manhattan with Amit Chaudhary maybe 15, 20 years ago, and I expressed my appreciation for a writer that we both knew. And if I was really a gossip monger, I would have said on this podcast who it was, because all of you know him. And Amit said, because he's a proper Bhadralok snob, he
Hmm.
said, yeah, yeah, he is interesting, Amita, but when you read a sentence, do you recognize it as his sentence? And I was like, oh, yeah, ye to googly, this is a real, acha. So this is what one should aim for, that
Hmm.
the sentence carries your own voice. So I don't claim that I have that. Uh, I feel happy, for example, when I call my local Indian grocery store here, and Manish ji there will always say on the phone, "Sir," when I'll say, "Sir, namaskar, मैं अमिताभ कुमार बोल रहा हूँ." He will say, in which way, by the way, the anxiety of influence, I'm trying to copy Ravish Kumar. Namaskar, मैं Ravish Kumar. So I'll always say to Manish ji, Namaskar, मैं अमिताभ कुमार बोल रहा हूँ. He says, Sir, मैं आपकी आवाज से ही पहचान लिया आपको. आपको कभी कहने की जरूरत नहीं. So that pleases me. But what about the voice on the page? You know what I'm saying? So I don't think I'm there. But that is my goal. That is my goal. That is my anxiety कि मैं मर ना जाऊं before I achieve that goal.
But this is not this is a lifetime's conundrum, like you said,
सही सही
because
सही.
Didion, who we both love, and most writers perhaps do as well, she's spoken, written endlessly about typing out Hemingway's sentences, right? Before she started work on anything. And uh, when I read that, it was enlightening for me कि अच्छा ऐसा करके भी सीखा जा सकता है rhythm. But it was also very frightening. And how do you go from typing out Hemingway's sentences to then not becoming a third, fourth Xerox of of Hemingway's sentences in whatever you're writing, right?
Yeah.
Have you thrown out any material ever when you were editing or reading your own work and you said, no, this is looking like a halka Xerox?
Hmm. नहीं,
No.
I have been a clever
That's cool.
imitator.
Well,
I
that's
have.
what writing is then.
Sahi,
I
sahi.
don't think you should worry. You have nothing to worry about. But, Amitav, we've been talking about having, the fact that you've been having conversations with other books and other writers and other cinema and ideas through your works. But you've also been responding to your own life through your works as writers do. Grief, fear of losing loved ones is something that has come up. Journeys, migration, naturally, given your own life story, has come up. I was wondering if there are, and these are themes that, again, can be a little bit intimidating because there are so many good writers, filmmakers, poets who have grappled with these themes. Um, do you have any works of poetry, literature that deal with these themes that you keep going back to or that you'd recommend to people? Themes
Yeah,
that interest you. They don't
yeah,
have to be just these two themes.
yeah. But let me address them in that order. At the end of The Enigma of Arrival, Naipaul describes the death of his sister. क्या pages हैं यार. Just a few pages. But what you get is grappling with death in a way that is profound. When I think about migration, there are some passages in Kiran Desai's Inheritance of Loss about a working class Indian man in New York, his life, and his relationship with his father, who is a cook in a small town near Darjeeling. Those things have stayed embedded in my memory. Some passages that I keep going back to. Yes. The abasement that happens to people and to their souls when they give in to desire that is a dubious desire, and which I feel, can come to any mortal. When I want to understand that, I always return to some pages of J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace. In more recent times, a book that is really special is Yeyun Lee's account of the death of her second child. Her first child died by suicide, and then a few years later, her second child also died by suicide. How to write about such devastation with intellectual rigor, with emotional rigor. That is, in Things in Nature Merely Grow. That is the name of the book. It's just amazing. And I have now read it at least 3 times. It's a great lesson in how to write about life without giving in to sentimentality, without reaching for the lowest hanging fruit, with never shedding intelligence, but using it to grasp more of life. पोएट्री में या दुष्यंत कुमार की जो कविताएं हैं ना, यहाँ I've got it here. I return to those. There is a poet from my own hometown, Alok Dhanwa. I read his poems. There is जो हिंदी में शब्द है ना, सरलता, a certain kind of simplicity that is both elegant and wonderful. वो भी पढ़ता हूँ मैं. I feel like you mentioned Joan Didion. The Year of Magical Thinking is a great book. I love it. These are all great books.
It's I've also, I mean, I guess most of us do, but I have grappled with the fear of losing loved ones, particularly my parents, because I was a very late child. And I think when I first read Year of Magical Thinking, it used to be a paralyzing fear. And I remember reading that book and thinking, I'll be able to get through grief. Not that I'd be able to write about it, but just I'll be able to get through grief. But Amitav, you also your work also often tries to make sense of politics, political culture, the impact of politics on society and culture. In this context, I'm curious, do you think all writing is political? And what, according to you, or all art is political? And what, according to you, is good political or political writing or cinema that you enjoy? Let's not use the word.
Yeah. The second part is easier for me to answer because I want to say most political writing that I really admire is the one where politics doesn't enter at all. You don't have a recognizable invocation of poetry, of politics. But on the other hand, sometimes it's eruption. Politics as an eruption in the middle is also very powerful. I know that you and I are both admirers of a film called Party. You know, there's a bourgeois quote unquote party, taking place. And then there is this figure of this rebellious poet. So, whoa, that's an eruption of politics as a disturbance. It's like a gunshot in the middle of a concert. Huh? तो वो भी मुझे पसंद है. But what I really like is, I was just saying to I was just saying to someone the other day, कि भाई, I do not, in this piece of writing, or rather my book doesn't have a title. I was saying to someone that the book didn't have a title like The Riot. Instead, it was something that arrived at it obliquely, you know? And so what I like about art is that when it can be political without seemingly being political. I mean, for example, Raja's cousin, Shaunak Sen's film seems to be about birds and beetles and animal life, but it is really about all life, and especially those forms of human life that some people would think of as animal life. Um, a genuine compassion for all. So that kind of art where politics is infusing everything, but not necessarily the focus, I think is very genuinely powerful also. So that's my one point. Is everything political? How in the end everything is, but that's like saying कि भाई हवा सब जगह है. We haven't said anything if I make such a generalization. ठीक है? Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Party, by the way, ticks two boxes for me when it comes to my favorite genre of writing. One is filmmaking, right? I mean, I'm saying writing because it's originally
सही,
Al-Kunchwar's play,
सही,
um,
सही.
which is writing as politics and writing as gossip. And he's managed to do both together because essentially every character there is, if you are entrenched in the world of Mumbai, Pune theatre, you can identify who's being taken out where.
Satirized,
So
yeah.
so
Oh, yeah.
bilkul so in that sense it's like sort of Evelyn was vile bodies or whatever, where it's kind of social satire
Wow.
which is very gossipy,
I
uh,
see. I
but
didn't even
at the
know that.
same time
I didn't even know that. It was so
that
powerful. I loved
that
it when I went.
that like you said, that jolt of but just to press you a little bit more before we move on this, because maybe every generation thinks so, but we'll be forgiven if we said that we live in particularly difficult, disturbing times,
सही, सही.
and it can be very, very hard, to deal with that kind of immediacy, because it's there's so much you're letting in when you're letting it all in. You gave a few examples. You gave the example of Shonak's film, and but I was wondering, particularly in the context of maybe what's going on in the rest of the world, particularly what's going on in America right now, where you are. Can you think of writing that is being able to respond with immediacy, but with a certain kind of um, effectiveness that you value?
One, we are living in a time of genocide. So let me start there. This short non-fiction work by Omar El-Akkad, One Day Everyone Will Have Been Against This, I think the title is. It's a wonderful title, and I'm sorry if I'm mangling it, is a good example. I also like Isabella Hamad's, it's a short book that was a lecture. There was the Edward Said Memorial Lecture. But what I like even more is her novel, Exit Ghost, that is about Hamlet being performed on the West Bank.
Enter Ghost.
Enter Ghost, sorry. अच्छा तो एग्जिट कोस्ट किसकी किताब शायद फिलिप रॉथ आई डोंट नो
हमारी है तुम्हारा सीक्वल है.
ओह माय गॉड यार आपने आपने ऐसा हंसाया कि my computer fell down and one part of the damn thing fell into the coffee cup. Can you still hear me though?
Well, you vanishing from the frame after saying exit ghost was maybe we won't be able to top that with anything
Oh my
we say.
God.
in this
That's amazing.
podcast.
That is amazing. अच्छा मैं क्या बोल रहा था तो हाँ वो but
Isabella Hamad, Enter Ghost.
हाँ so as a response to the times, maybe those are examples. In the same way as one of the most depressing things coming from our motherland were those videos that had become so common of, let's say, Pehlu Khan being lynched. So in this country, because you asked about America, the most depressing things were these videos of black men being shot by white cops. And I thought this work by Claudia Rankin called Citizen was an amazing response to these events, not least because it was poetry as prose and mixing visual things. It was the only book that was a finalist for both Criticism Award and the Poetry Award. And I thought, since I'm interested in the crossing of genres and how to create something new that defies conventional boundaries, I thought that was yet another example, Claudia Rankin's Citizen, of what artists could do, which was different from, let's say, Timothy Snyder's response to the Trump presidency, which was a short book called On Tyranny that was circulated widely in this country. A friend of mine who is a wonderful writer, Jenny Offel, said that she sometimes left copies of it on the subway, which I thought was a great act. So those are my examples.
Right. Amitava, you've for your next book, you've undertaken this idea of train journeys.
Gee.
And you're looking at a lot of train journeys. You're revisiting the concept of the train journey and looking at the social life of trains. So, are there works specific to the train? I mean, for me, the train is a very cinematic bit of imagery. We have everything. We have many films set around trains, right from Sholay, Sholay onward, really. But also, I remember a Doordarshan show. The name escapes me, which was also about train journeys.
Yatra. Something like that.
Yatra, which was,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So again, every episode, it was kind of an anthology of sorts, and train journeys, different train journeys each time. So what works did you revisit, artistic works, to get into this train frame of mind?
I watched on YouTube that little sequence from Pather Panchali where Durga and Appu see the train. I asked your cousin, Raja, where was the shot? He said, oh, I have an essay about it. I'll send it to you. He never did. So let me publicly accuse him of irresponsibility.
Right.
I actually, one of the things I did was go to the British Library to look at all the records. And there was too much there. All the records of the colonial setting up of the railways. I have written a Substack about it, and it was amazing to me that from years like 1848, I could bring out this huge ledger, and it had all the accounts of how much money was being, given to what you know, in the Madras Railways, in Bombay Railways, and these accounts. Also, also, there were other documents, like one that explained to me how the Brits had thought about and what were the debates in the Parliament about how, especially after the mutiny of 1857, what they call the mutiny of 1857, how would railways not only help with the transport of things like cotton, but also with the transport of the army quickly to places where people were rising in revolt. Also, the anxiety about not giving to Indians the right to control the railways, and therefore how the top ranks, but also even the drivers, the guards, were all British. And then the cultivation of the Anglo-Indian community as a community which would be the sort of a for-colonial authority. All of these things were for me useful. I read a few histories. I asked, you guys must know Sabrina Dhawan, who wrote the script for Monsoon Wedding.
Right.
I asked her to send me, and Ali Mir, who is also a lyricist,
Hmm.
कि भैया, tell me all the scenes that you remember of in Hindi films that are iconic scenes. And so they sent me a whole list of films and a whole list of songs. So that is about how much I did in terms of research. The guy, it is a part. This trains thing is a part of the Essential India series. So they wanted only a short piece. I intended it to be a part of my longer project, which is a book on India. But they only wanted 15,000 words. So, that's what I did. I thought that was enough work. I thought I should report. So I undertook trips.
Hmm.
The last being what I remember as my first most delightful trip, which was taking the toy train up to Darjeeling as a child. My cousin was going on a honeymoon, and for some odd reason, he decided I should go with him on the honeymoon. So a couple of months ago, alone by myself, but accompanied by other couples I could
Hmm.
see in the train compartment who were honeymooners, I undertook that trip and reported about it. And that is where the book comes to an end. It'll be out in early December.
Right. That's a wonderful vantage point. And for me, the little train cinema snippet, because we've mentioned Makbul so much on this podcast, is actually a moment from Omkara, where Nasiruddin Shah says in his imperious way, playing this big gangster, in his imperious way, he says, in the train, he says, Gadi Ghumado. And
Arre
so
wah.
that is the ultimate flex, really.
Oh my God. Which reminds me, if I might indulge you in family stories, oh, when I was in college, I would take the train from Patna to Delhi. In Ara, which is my birthplace, my mama, who imagined himself as a gangster, would be there waiting with some meat or mutton or chicken to give to me. And then if I would say, "Na na, आप लोग उतारिए, अब आप लोग जाइए, go." First he would shout and say, "Hey, जगह खाली कीजिए, लड़का को ठीक से सोने दीजिए." And then when I would encourage him to get off, he was a big, heavy man. I would say, "Na आप उतारिए." He said, "हर vacuum में काट देंगे." He would insist that they would slice the vacuum connection so that the train would not be able to move. So, but I have forgotten this scene from Omkara. I'll go back to it, boss. All right.
While you guys were talking, I was thinking of what would my very quickly, what would my favorite cinematic moment on train would be. And I think hands down, it would be Devanand singing Upar Wala Jaan Ke Anjaan Hai. I don't think anything can top that. But yeah, Amitav, that this is like most people living in cities with roots in an Indian village. I was no stranger to train journeys when I was a child because, there were only that many ways to get around. I'm sure you were not either. But this kind of cognitive dissonance never went away because this kind of gilded romance of train journeys that came to me by way of even Agatha Christie's Orient Express, or, somehow still survived the onslaught of real life experiences I had, all kinds of very severe experiences in train journeys. And so I was wondering if you had romantic ideas about train journeys that you had to reckon with while taking, your own journeys for this book. And if to expand the question, this is an experience you've had in life otherwise also, where you've come to a situation or an experience wearing rose tinted glasses that you have acquired from a movie or a book or a piece of writing or art.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, in this in this Train's book, the journey I'm describing, it first came as a romantic idea from a documentary that was made in 1967. I Am 20. Well, and I thought, oh, I'll do the same. I'll ask questions. I had this romantic idea. But for those who will read the book, they will discover that there were numerous difficulties in just such an enjoyable ride. But I've always, even during those rides, going from Delhi to Patna or Patna to Delhi, when you had a seat, when you had a berth, if you had a friend, if it was night, if there was the moon outside, accompanying you, it was such a pleasant thing to just witness. And then it could very quickly turn into something terrible. Once, for example, all of us were returning from the hostel. We were coming to Patna, but one of us got into a fight with these men from Aligarh, and how shall I say, they meted out proper physical treatment to us. And I've witnessed remarkable acts of tenderness, but also cruelty on the platform and on the trains. So the romance never goes away. I mean, for example, all of us have enjoyed Shah Rukh Khan dancing on the top of the train. But the reality is, so many people get killed. And I cite some figures in this book that is coming out of how many people in Bihar, for example, returning from an exam, get killed because they're sitting on top of the train and the bridge, and the train enters a bridge. तो वो तो कहानी है. एक चीज मैं ये भी बोलना चाहूंगा. There was a woman, I forget her name, but I have got her somewhere in my notes. There was a woman who appeared on Kaun Banega Crorepati. She was, if you Google something like the most cheerful woman on KBC, she will come up. And she kept saying to Amitabh Bachchan, Jai Ho KBC. And she explains how, for the first time, she traveled on the plane and how she's at the hotel. And then she says something which totally struck me, which was that all her life, she has only traveled on trains, and every time you're on the train, you have to keep looking down to see if your luggage is still there. That's something I have done countless times, right? And this woman says, but now, Jai Ho KBC, because I was on the plane, they take away your luggage and they return it to you when you land. And she said that was the best experience she had. So what I'm saying is that all the anxiety of train travel, कि भैया reservation रहेगा कि नहीं, हमको जगह मिलेगी कि नहीं, even if I have a reservation, will I get my seat or not? All those fears have so spiked my life and my history that I now return to them with a feeling of almost tenderness.
I think for a lot of us, it was always the best place to read. You would buy books every other station. I remember my hack that my mother used to use on me as a child was to buy me Hindi comic books, Chacha Chaudhary and Raka and all in Hindi, because Hindi padhne mein mujhe bahut waqt lagta tha. So she would be like, this will at least keep him occupied for longer. And then I've written on trains because it's wonderful, because it's, it allows you that space. But when you're going through a train journey with pen and paper to write about the train journey itself, how does that change the journey for you?
Various people, certainly my students, are often skeptical when I ask them to journal, because they think the authenticity of their experience is being challenged. Ki bhaiya, if I'm doing something and at the same time I'm taking notes, how am I able to enjoy it, or how am I able to fully experience it? But I believe that if you're taking notes, you notice more. And that is the dharma of the writer, boss, to take in more, to take in more. And so it has been a great feeling for me to look at my notes from, let's say, 15 years ago. I'm on a train going from Patna to Allahabad because I'm going to Ayodhya after that. And to notice now, after a passage of so many years, what were the things I was noticing, and what history has come to pass. So I'm a great advocate. I'm a great advocate of someone of everyone taking notes. I mean, you shouldn't, when you're in a restaurant eating a food, also take notes at the same time while you're eating, maybe. Or I certainly don't recommend it when you are making love. But come as close to it as possible. When you go to the
A
bathroom.
dictaphone, perhaps.
Yes. Well, yeah, which is not my way, but I would rather sneak into the bathroom and write down quickly something.
That obviously brings me to your journals, the blue book and the green book and the yellow book. And I must say, before I ask you the question, I want to ask you that the idea for this podcast came to me because of your journals. So it
Boss,
was
that's too much.
no, no,
Yes, but thank you
it
for
is,
the
it
honor.
is. So it came because I was in the world of those books, and it got me thinking about how we consume culture, and how we consume what we are reading, whether it's in a newspaper, what we're looking at from outside our window, how we join the dots between books that live in us and scenes and lines that live in us, and how there's a chasm between that and how culture writing is done. Um, so the books obviously mean a lot to me. Um, but I was, in the blue book, you quote Sontag talking about how journaling is a form of fashioning selfhood, right? And Gulzar has blurbed the book, and he says something very interesting that, वैसे किसी की डायरी पढ़नी नहीं चाहिए. He says it in English, but in my head I read it in Hindi.
Bilkul.
You shouldn't read somebody else's diary, but it didn't feel like I was reading somebody else's diary when I read it. It felt like I was reading my own. And it struck me that these are both beautiful quotes, but in a sense, they're both saying something quite different from one another, right? One is talking about using a journal to fashion selfhood, and another is talking about the experience of reading a journal and finding yourself in it. Um, I was wondering if these are two examples of two things journals can do. What are some other examples you've come across when reading other journals of what they can do, reading them
Yeah.
or writing them?
Yeah. Just 2 months ago, I was reading Smoking Diaries by Simon Gray, which is his account of wanting to give up and not being able to give up cigarette smoking. And just his human acceptance of why it was necessary to keep smoking in a fucked up world was so marvelous to me. Yesterday I was reading about a psychology experiment which said that if you are tempted by something, let's say eating some chocolate or eating some fruit, but if you keep working, it leads to what the psychologist called ego depletion. What he was saying was that by repressing something, you are actually depleting your ego. It makes you weaker, physically weaker too. That was where the psychology experiment led. And I want to say that those journals that convey to me that this person is not suppressing anything always conveys to me a sense that this person is gathering strength from the writing. And you get it in a classic text like Virginia Woolf's diaries. You know, she's just offering these lustrous, and she's unchecked. She's just recording in the best way she can how the light is falling on the roofs as she's going through Turkey as a young woman and how much money she's spending on champagne. Okay? और मुझे लगता है कि यार ये तो गजब है. And then when you come to someone more contemporary, whose journal can I think of apart from Simon Gray? There is a woman called Anne Truitt, who is a sculptor. I enjoyed reading her. You know, this idea that you're escaping suppression or repression, you're finding freedom. That is what should come across in a journal. That should be the goal of the journal. I feel that about Jeff Dyer also, you know. And I certainly want to, I'm not saying I'm doing it already, but I certainly want to embrace that ideal in my own journals. कि ये बंदा एनल नहीं था, you know, कि इसने सोचा कि हाँ, I'll take delight in the world. I'll take delight even in expressing what is unknowing about the world. And I'll do so with an irrepressible expressivity. तो वही idea है. So those are some examples I can think of at the moment. I should have prepared better.
What I'm curious about
Ji.
is that, the writing of the journal is such an intimate act, right? You are trying to chronicle something for yourself to look at later, to learn from later, to see for various purposes, of course. But and I guess it has changed now in this current era when we are all on social media and in some ways chronicling our life for public consumption. But when you are writing these journals and you know that these journals are to be published, does it change the way you would normally approach the journal? Do you write it a little differently?
Yeah. Well, I'm always aware, I guess, that I can always change or leave out, rather, or omit what is going to be published. So I try not to hide anything. You know, this friend that I mentioned, Cheryl Strayed, she told me that her husband at that time had read a letter she had received. And she wrote in her journal that night that she was never going to be afraid to write what she was feeling or what she was thinking. And that seems to me to be a good ideal. You know, it's like I've never been in therapy, but I'm told that you can. And why it excites me or interests me about that prospect of going to a therapist, except where is the best therapist? I don't know, is that you don't have to hide anything from the therapist. You can tell the therapist that you want to sleep with your mother, for example, that you have had this dream, that this is yucky, but this came to you. And it is okay. It is okay to be able to say that. Well, that is what should be the relationship to a journal. In fact, that is what should be your relationship to writing in general. That is the umbilical cord that binds the journal to creativity.
Before I move on from this, um, I want to ask you what
Ji.
you felt about the publication of Notes to John Didion's
वो
book.
मैंने पढ़ा नहीं है, but I wasn't very happy about it.
Because it is notes from her therapy that she
I
wrote.
see.
It's therapy that she was doing, and she was writing notes every day.
I
And it was
see.
very interesting to me because in in her essay collection, let me tell you what I mean. She has an essay practically railing against the publication of a work by Hemingway, which she had not authorized and was published posthumously. And her essence, the essence of her argument is that a man who cared so much about his sentences, do you think that he would have been okay with you
Say.
publishing?
I understand
Yes.
the point. Yeah.
So I was wondering because, you were saying that that's what all writing should aim to be. I was wondering where, chalo kabhi padho to batana. But
What did you? But before you go, what did you think about? Did you like
it
it?
was, I mean, I was appalling to me that it was published. I was very
Oh,
sad to read it, even
but is
though
it
I wanted,
insightful? Is it insightful or not?
not at all. Because the thing is
Oh,
that
I
usse
see.
kahin zyada, usne her two books about grief,
Yeah, sure.
Blue Night and Year of Magical Thinking, because essentially it's about her processing what's going on with her daughter
Say.
before her daughter passes.
Yeah.
And she's already written what she wanted to write about it. She wrote that book.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful book. So
Yeah.
it was.
Okay.
It was.
I need to say something to you guys because both of you have you guys watched that documentary called "The Center Cannot Hold" about
Yes,
Joan Didion?
yes,
Yeah.
of course, many times. Oh.
Raja, yes or no? Okay. It is made by her nephew. Well, her husband's nephew. And he asks in one scene, he asks his Aunt Joan about that one scene that happens in Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
Hmm.
What did you feel when you saw that girl? When you
Licking
saw
acid.
that, yeah?
Licking acid.
Licking acid. I think what he expects is what the superego expects to say, oh, I was appalled. That was so sad. I rushed to a social worker. But instead, what you have is what is the voice that should be there in the journal and should be there in the writing. She shakes her hands, which are, struck by Parkinson's or whatever she was suffering from. And she says, it was gold. It was gold. For as a writer, that is what you live for, And so I have always thought that her voice, that her writing was as close to real journal writing as you would want it to be,
But also that moment, that pause, which again, the pause is not even perhaps intended because she's quite ill by the time, quite struck by both MS and Parkinson's by the time she's doing it. But oh my God, the truth of that moment, because all of us have felt it, Amitabh. All of us nonfiction writers and journalists and reporters have felt this. We have felt our heart break, but we found that one character and we found him or her to say that one thing. And all we can feel is हमारे मन में लड्डू फूट रहे हैं when actually the
Yeah, you're
cognitive
dealing
dissonance
with
again,
devastation. Yeah.
because you are writing that sentence as you go. But Amitabh, moving on from this chain of thought, your journals also remind me of your very special gift as a writer and reader, which is to be able to inhabit the worlds of cinema, of poetry, of journalism, of criticism, of fiction, of art, and to be able to move so seamlessly between genres, between cultural sensibilities, between languages. And I was wondering, why is this important for you? And can you think of other writers who do this well?
My friend Teju does it very well. I think, well, Terry Eagleton has this great line that the most interesting work is done at the intersection of various forms. And I think in India, Bengalis are particularly equipped to do that sort of thing. I don't know why, but they grow up singing Rabindra Sangeet or something like that. Or that's what's in the popular imagination. They are also literary and they eat good food. So, Amit Chaudhary is a good example. For me, it's none of these things. It's not my upbringing. And it's not certainly that I'm talented in on any of these things. I mean, I'm tone deaf, musically poor. For me, it's just that I have wasted decades of my life and now I want to consume it in huge mouthfuls. Jaise ho sake. So I'm invested in expressing my love for life in every medium that is at hand. And I don't care for the quality necessarily. Quality is a byproduct. Let the intensity of the passion and my interest and the quality of the curiosity drive me forward. So that is where it comes from, you know. Other people inherit it, maybe, or they have parents who say to them, "Ki bhaiya, you're now 6 years old, start taking music lessons or do this." My parents never did any of that. In fact, when the radio was being played, they would turn it off, saying, "Hey, hey, और कोई काम नहीं है, खाली गाना सुनना है तुमको." So, so right now in late life, I decided let me be a painter also, you know, and I've flaunted my limitations with great ease. You know, every morning I make a drawing, and I often post it on Instagram as an Insta story. I don't care about its quality. It's just like I'll do it and I'll share it, and that impels me to do more. And I think that is what certainly the arts should be about removing all barriers and making you interact with the world much more intensely.
Amitav, you're informed by the practice of noticing, है ना? और एक there's a essay that Naipaul writes about how Indian writers um, look but they can't see, and I always read that. It's a terrifying essay for me to read. I keep rereading it, but it's like a rap on the knuckles, and you don't know what the rap is for. It's a terrifying essay, and you've responded to it with a beautiful poem, which I thought was such a fabulous example of what you were talking about earlier, your constant conversation with Naipaul. So, pehle to, if you have access to that poem, can you read it? Ideally, you have it in Hindi and in English, so you can choose which one you want to read it in. And I was wondering, in addition to Naipaul, who else has helped you train your eye?
There's a classic essay by George Orwell, freely available on the web, called The Hanging. People should read it because Orwell notices something. A prisoner, I imagine he is a person from Tamil Nadu because he calls him a Dravidian. A prisoner is being taken to be hung. You know, he's going to die in a few minutes. He's being led by two sipahis who are taller than him. It has rained the previous night, so there is a puddle, and Orwell notices that the prisoner steps aside to avoid the puddle. And that is a wonderful thing for him to notice, and he draws a lesson from it. Now, so I think that's a wonderful example of a writer noticing. James Wood, in his book Serious Noticing, talks about this, but he also says that Orwell might have borrowed this scene, from another scene in War and Peace, where Tolstoy has a man who is about to be shot adjust the tightness of the blindfold so that he's at ease. These small things are great instructions, are great lessons. I've always tried to do what I learned from Orwell. So, for example, if I'm talking about train journeys, I remember once in Patna on a train, a prisoner sitting between two policemen. And I might have thought of Orwell at that time, but I saw how one of the policemen reached into the prisoner's pocket because the prisoner had asked him to do something. He reached into the prisoner's breast pocket, take out a note and give it to an ice cream vendor who was selling these popsicles, you know. And all three of them then sucked on that ice cream that they got. So these little moments of noticing how what is happening is a wonderful exercise that I have tried to absorb. And now for the poem. I'll just read 2-3 lines in Hindi first, and then I'll read it in English. सच छूछा होता है. महात्मा गांधी की आत्मकथा में मौसम का कहीं जिक्र नहीं. लंदन की किसी इमारत या सड़क के बारे में कोई बयान नहीं, किसी कमरे की, कभी एकत्रित भीड़ या यातायात के किसी साधन की कहीं कोई चर्चा नहीं। यह वीएस नाइपॉल की आलोचना है। नाउ फॉर द इंग्लिश रूल्स ऑफ राइटिंग। Nowhere in Mahatma Gandhi's memoir does he mention the weather or describe London's streets, its houses, or even a room, the crowds, no discussion of any mode of transport. This criticism has been made by V.S. Naipaul. But the weather was inside Gandhi, a solitary spirit caught in the storm, a lone self, walking, stumbling, making his own moral way. If you're searching for the truth, how does it matter whether the sun set this evening at 6:15 or at 6:25? But I do heed V.S. Naipaul. If you are not a Mahatma and merely a writer, you will have to pay attention and take note of the lovers whose names are scratched on the walls that rise around you, the interval between the drops of rain being blown on the roof, the lithe branches of trees dancing in the wind, the ringing of a bicycle's bell, the silence after a riot. You will have to write about the young woman sitting alone in the canteen and the glass of water in front of her in which the whole world appears upside down.
I love this poem so much, Amitabh. And I was thinking about your choice to write it both in Hindi and English. And I was thinking about this devastating line from, I think, the Blue Book, in which you are talking about explaining the words of a Hindi song to your son. And you talk about losing Hindi as a
Yes.
language. And I was wondering, um, this thinking in Hindi, writing in Hindi and in English, trying to make space for Hindi in your English writing, not by using actual, maybe literally Hindi words, but maybe it's rhythms. Um, are there writers who, even though writing in one language, sometimes manage to incorporate the sensibilities of other
Mm.
languages and the worlds of other languages?
Yes, yes. I think a suitable boy does have a Hindi cadence to it. There is something there, or at least that's how I felt.
100%. Completely
Hana?
agree with
Oh, very
you.
good,
Yeah,
very good.
bilkul.
I, yeah. I mean, how should I say? I'm sometimes I've complained about this elsewhere too, I think, but I'll be in a restaurant, let's say in Delhi, and you can see that the person who is serving in the restaurant, who has just come to clear the plates, for example, or give you water, is probably not the most educated person around. But I will hear or I'll see people speak to them in English. And it maybe with the privilege of an NRI, it infuriates me. And I often think that I'll only speak in the vernacular to most people that I can. This is a private prejudice of mine, I'm saying. But this desire to write in Hindi always happens when I'm in India, in particular, or when I've come back. And I try to, I don't write poems much anymore at all, actually. This is, again, a very recent thing that I have been doing along with the art. But when I write the poems, I only write first in Hindi because I want to access a different thing a different kind of feeling, a different kind of sentiment than I would experience if I was writing in English. So it's a very it's a deliberate choice I'm making because I'm thinking I'm accessing a sensibility that is closer to the soil in which I grew up.
Now that you've mentioned art, what is the difference, you think, between the way a writer observes and the way an artist observes? Is there a fundamental difference in the gaze and in what they are looking out for, what makes the impact, or is it all part of the same observational analysis that you're doing?
Yeah, I always think about it. Picasso said that painting for him was like keeping a journal. So we get a sense that, he's thinking that by painting every day, he's keeping a journal, and that's great. But your question is a bit more particular than that. I think that the rhythm of marks someone makes on a canvas or on a page must be is similar to the rhythm one finds in establishing a certain structure in your sentence, whether it's a short sentence or a long sentence, whether the subject comes first or the verb comes first. It is just like finding a rhythm. It's all about the rhythm. And so for me, the artist looking more carefully at the shape of the blade of grass and then drawing it accurately is not removed from the way in which I see the window and I see the sunlight slanting through it and I try to reflect it on the page in what I'm writing.
Now, you wear many hats, out of which one is that of the teacher. You alluded to that when you were speaking about the practice of journaling and their skepticism about it. But tell us fundamentally, when you're teaching writing, what are your go-tos? What are you trying to really steer them toward? Isn't it more of an instinctive thing that they're trying to find on their own? What are you as a when you're teaching writing to a mixed group? How do you decide what to steer them toward? Is that also a differing instinct, or is that a structure that you have learned allows you to find the flow?
You're a writer because you write. You're not a writer because you write better than others. You're not a writer because you publish. You're a writer because you engage in the practice of writing. So that's what I'm really teaching them. Or at least that's where I always begin. That you sit down and you write. So what can I do to engender such a practice? That is what I'm trying to do. So one of the things I do is share with them some rules of writing. I say to them, you have to write 150 words every day, and you have to walk mindfully for 10 minutes every day. You have to keep a journal. You have to have a notebook with you all the time. You do this, you do that. And I'm trying to model myself. I teach them from my own example. So when I say to them, this is the course that you're taking, which will be a year-long course, unlike the other courses which are a semester long, you have to try to have a substantial body of work by the end, a bunch of short stories, a book of poems, a short novella. I will do the same, So I try to be the model for them, and I share with them what I do. I show them the notebook in which I use a check mark to show that I have done my writing for the day. Just to, no one told me when I was young in India that what I should do as a writer. I had a political science teacher, I remember, in Hindu college. Everyone at that time, you guys are much younger than me, so you will not have maybe had this fad thrust upon you. Everyone at that time was reading a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. So this guy, his name was Pradeep Chibber. He seemed very cool. I said to him, sir, ये मैं जनपद पे खरीदा हूँ ये किताब, ये पढ़ना चाहिए. Because everyone was reading, I wouldn't even have said ये पढ़ना चाहिए, मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ. I tried to say to him. And he said, यार ये गोली है, गोली. ये तो साला गोली है. Now, this struck me कि अच्छा गोली है. लेकिन सब लोग पढ़ रहे हैं. And I thought he could have explained to me कि boss, I understand that you're trying to reach for literature. ये चूतियापा है. Read this instead. He did not do that. But I tried to say to my students, read this, read this, read this, write this, write this, write this. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. You will not be able to anticipate the changes that will come into your being and what you will produce by the end. Believe in me, believe in yourself, and believe in the process. That is what I teach.
But has being a teacher changed the way you read? Do you read other work and find yourself mentally correcting passages and crossing things out?
I don't do it as steadfastly as some of my other friends do. I get carried away. I'm easily seduced. But what is wrong in that? ठीक ही है. If you're reading more critically and you think, just say I mentioned Teju, he will send me one line saying, I cannot believe that they have this line. Where are editors these days? और मुझे लगता है कि यार ये तो बड़ी अच्छी उसकी practice है. I'm not always doing that, but yes, I think it's a good thing to do. I think it's a good thing to do, to be a teacher in that way, to be critical and to be read and to think, yaar, this is amazing. To quickly write next to something that has been done beautifully by a writer you like there, this is wonderful. And on the other hand, to say, so yes, it is true that in some of the books I read, I cut out some sections that this should have been taken out. For example, I mentioned that A Hanging by George Orwell, the description that he gives of the prisoner avoiding the puddle is beautiful. The paragraph where he unpacks the meaning is a bit too much because it is over-explaining. So I'm sure in my copy upstairs, I have cut it out like that.
So I wanted to two things very quickly. You mentioned Orwell a number of times, and we've been talking about works in conversation with one another. I think the living memoirs of Deborah Levy, which start with things I do not want to know, which is her response to why I write, will be one of my favorite responses to a seminal work of art.
Just repeat. Deborah Levy की वो किताब का नाम क्या है?
Things I do not want to know about.
Wow.
But I'm glad that you can still be easily seduced, because one of the great curses of life is we all become our parents, and you are not becoming your parents and throwing away your guilty pleasure scrapbooks yet. But last question that we ask you, Amitav, for this evening is going to be based on the title of this podcast, which is Play It Again, which is about reevaluation, rereading, revisiting. Is there any work of art, poetry, literature that you think has not been correctly evaluated by and large? That could be because it's been given more than its share of due, or it's not been given its share of due. But can you think of examples?
Sure. Akhil Sharma's The Obedient Father was reviewed in the New York Review of Books here by an Indian writer, Akash Kapoor. And the negative last paragraph, which suggested quite explicitly that as a banker, Akhil did not have time to craft his books right, made his publishers pull the advertising on the book. There were high-minded moral reviewers in India who refused to review the book. I think I was the only one who gave the book a positive review in the front line. It is a difficult novel to read. It is the novel in the voice of a father who rapes his child. But I don't think a more original novel had been written in English in the years preceding it and in the years following it for quite a while. There have been others, better books by other writers, and maybe even by him. But that book did not receive the attention it deserved, and all in the name of a morality that was very suspect to me. So that is one book I would mention.
Anything else that comes to mind?
Which has not received. Yaar, the truth about all writing and all writers is that they feel that they have not been justly served by history.
So let's reverse the question. Anything that you don't get the hype about. It doesn't have to be that it doesn't deserve the hype, but it doesn't make sense to you.
There are so many. But won't I attract bad karma and the disdain of the gods if I right now start listing the books that so readily spring to mind? No, I think, I'll stay within my I'll stay in my lane, as they say, and be modest and say, nothing immediately comes to mind, but I'm sure there are some books
This is the time you've chosen to behave yourself. Okay.
that I've decided not to be honest with the therapist.
Yeah.
But
Not to be honest with the therapist.
but it is there in my journal. In my journal, if you were to flip through my journal, you would find the mention of all the books that I think are being unjustly celebrated, that has been given the quality of genius which they sorely lack.
Chalo, now we're turning the tables, and in this final segment before we let you go, we are going to we do this exercise between ourselves where we ask ourselves, what are the movies, books, art, music that we think of when we think of this writer's or filmmaker's work? So you can take them as recommendations. You can take them as a sort of association word or association game. I'll let Raja begin.
Okay, so it's very hard picking books for you because I imagine you to have read most things. So in case that you have read these books, because they're not obscure or rare, but they're just beautiful books that I would like your opinion on them, if anything else. But one is one of my favorite books by Joseph Heller, which is called Portrait of the Artist as an Old Man,
Wow.
which which is a brilliant book because it's about this well-regarded writer whose last few books have not really clicked, and he's trying to write another masterpiece. So the whole book is a series of chapter ones. He's writing in a different voice, he's writing a
What a
different
great idea.
style.
Oh my
And
God.
it is just beautiful. It also always reminds me in a way of the opening of Woody Allen's Manhattan, because it's like chapter one, chapter one, chapter one, and he doesn't like any of the openings to the voiceover till he considers himself with coiled sexual power and all of that.
Wow.
That suddenly when
Wow.
he's like, this is the one I like. So
See,
that's the Joseph Heller book is really, I think it's quite beautiful because it's artifice, of course, because he's trying to be pretentious and he's trying to, appeal to different audiences or even his old audiences or even to himself. But there is some honesty in the way he's flailing around, and it's really quite beautiful. And the film that really came to mind to me while listening to you talk was like one of the best regarded films of last year. So, Perfect Days by Wim Wenders.
I want to watch it. Thank you
Oh, I'm
for
so glad you
reminding
haven't
me.
seen it, because it is about a man who cleans
Yes, yes,
toilets in
toilets.
Japan,
Yeah, yeah.
and some of the greatest things in it, the visually as well as emotionally, are the fact that he looks at the sunlight coming through the leaves. That is his leitmotif, really. Wherever he is, he's cleaning a toilet, someone comes to use it, he has to step out, and he finds an angle and looks at the sun coming through the trees, and that puts him at peace. And it's this wonderful, wonderful film about contentment.
Excellent. I heard he was visiting India recently. Yeah.
He
Take.
came by, and I spoke to him about those very shots, and he said his wife shot them and everything, and that's what has inspired that angle. But he's also the kind of filmmaker who's given to reverie, right? It's also many moments between the lines that really hold our gaze. And finally, there is this Wes Anderson short film called The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar, which is his adaptation of a Roald Dahl short story with Benedict Cumberbatch, and this is something of part of a series he did for Netflix. And in that, it is about this person, this you know millionaire who is like a rough guy who only thinks about money. And at one point of time, when bored on somebody else's country estate, he picks up a book and starts reading it and gets so inspired that his life changes by that book, and changes in very unexpected ways, because he learns a magic trick through a book and decides, like you did in terms of the meditation, that you were above things like Celsius, is that idea that through the book he decides that even I can look through a can look through a closed book and read a page. Similarly, I can read a playing card and become a gambler. And so that's how the story, it's a delightful story. I hadn't read the Dal story, but the short film is quite extraordinary. Quite
Excellent.
beautiful.
Before I start on mine, I want to quickly say, Raja, that this time we didn't get the chance to discuss what we were going to say. And actually, it's not on my list, but in my long list, Perfect Days was there as well. So this probably might be the one of the rare times when we could have had crossed wires. And that first example that you gave also reminds me of 41 False Starts by Janet Malcolm, which is another writer I believe we share much love for. But I have to say, perhaps this was the most difficult exercise to do, to think of things that to recommend to you. So even because I can't imagine that you haven't read or seen anything. I firmly believe that if it's been written, you have read it.
I'm the most illiterate guy, boss.
But
And I must already thank you, by the way, both for planting that idea of Anubhav and then for the Deborah Levy idea. So, but please go ahead and tell me.
so again, you probably have come across these, but I will take these as a start to a conversation about these. So sabse pehle, in your desert island books, I was surprised that you didn't mention John Berger, but I do know that you love the man as much as
Yes.
I do. And for that, there is a film that Tilda Swinton made. I wonder if you've seen it.
No, I've always wanted to, never managed to.
4 seasons in
Yes, and a
Conti,
plum.
which she made over 5 years and eventually released in the summer of 2016. And of course, within a few months, he was dead. And it's a portrait of a friendship. It's a portrait of this man, and it's just the most moving thing. It's a movie I keep going back to. The odd thing is, since he passed away, I haven't read anything of his other than The Underground Sea. I think I read after he passed away again, but I've gone back to the film more than a couple of times.
Excellent.
So that was the first thing.
That's a beautiful one.
The second was perhaps coming out of my beloved life. I don't know if you've had the chance to see Sabar Bonda, Cactus Pears, which is a Marathi film, debut film by Rohan Kanwade, a very young filmmaker that won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. And it is a film about a man coming back from Mumbai to his village um, on his father's passing and 10 days of that mourning period. It's a film about much more than that, of course. It's about grief, it's about um, repressed desire. But what it does with time, what it does with space, what it does with silence is really, really remarkable. It's a very, very moving film and a very beautiful film. And it manages to have the lightness you talk about.
Wow.
Despite the fact that it's dealing with very, very heavy subjects. The second thing, which perhaps does not have the lightness, but I thought of from my beloved life, is Jitish Kallat's artwork Epilogue. I don't know if you've ever come across it. I'm just going to read what the artwork is about from his own description so that I don't mutilate it or go on forever. In Epilogue, the artist memorializes the lifetime of his late father by invoking the 22,889 moons that he saw during his lifetime. Organized by the months of each year, the moons are represented by rotis, the edges of which grow or crumble away as the moon waxes and wanes. The lunar rotis, a recurring motif in the artist's work, distill live time into its essential components, the daily bread, the recurring routine, even as they connect it to a shared, eternally recurring celestial phenomenon. At the end of the path that the viewer walks with Kallat as he retraces his father's life is a poignant frame with a lone moon. It represents the night of the 1st of December 1998, the last moon that the artist's father lived through. And the reason I thought of it is not just because of my beloved life, but also about something you write about your father elsewhere, about trying to understand him better through mundane notes that he makes about how much he spends on
Yes.
things. So that's the other one. And one more quickly, which is a trickier one to kind of encapsulate very quickly, is when I am thinking of writing on exile, on journey, on migration, I always somehow end up thinking of Wajid Ali Shah, who is a larger than life figure in my mind, because he straddles my worlds, which is Awadh and Calcutta. And he is the only thread that runs between otherwise these two very disparate worlds of mine. And for me, it's always been fascinating how his poetry, which was Indra Sabha and this poetry of romance, and that changes when he goes into exile. And on the one hand, he starts writing in Avdi Babul Mora Naihar Chuto Hi Jaye, and on the other hand, खुश रहो अहले वतन हम तो सफ़र करते हैं. There is one book, not a great book, but Pearl by the River by Sudipta Mitra, that documents his years in exile and his resistance to leaving Awadh, even though he has left Awadh. And finally, for your last book, the Green Book, but also the work that I imagine you're working on. I say I imagine because कहीं मतलब उड़ती उड़ती बातें सुनी है मैंने. Is Naveen Kishore, who is the publisher of an independent publishing house called Seagull. He's also a poet and he's also a photographer. He has been working on this project where he's been photographing. I don't know if you know about this, but he's been photographing. The project I'm talking about. He's been photographing these trees and transferring rust on the prints of his photographs. And in the idea is that will uniquely grow and corrode these works um, in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, and each work will therefore be unique. It'll be dynamic, but it is his comment on contemporary art's fixation on value, on resaleability, but it's also, of course, his comment on climate change and what we are doing to the environment, which is something that you have also been trying to make sense of. So yeah, that was my list.
Excellent. Generous curation. I mean, I should be humbled and honored, or honored and humbled, by both your attention to what I've already written, but also your imaginative extension, which is what I guess all teaching should also be about, where people, instead of being passive consumers, become active generators of ideas. And I think your idea of doing these recommendations at the end is a genius idea. It's so creative. It's a genuine collaboration then. And I think I want to celebrate this because it really, I think creativity in our culture will grow from precisely collaborative acts, because increasingly our technologies make us isolated, alone, and if we are talking to each other using that technology, we are certainly fighting against the beast. And then when you bring to it such imaginative acts of generosity, then we grow even further. So thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for writing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Amita.
You guys are amazing.
Thank you. It was a delight.
That is all we have for this episode. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for tuning in. And if you like the episode, if you like this podcast, please, please, please recommend it to your friends. Please talk about it. Please share it on social media. Subscribe, like. It's an independently produced podcast. It's a labor of love, and it will do us a lot of good to hear from you, to be encouraged by you, to be supported by you. Thank you.